I'm going to start with catching up on a couple of missions here. The first is for those of you that are regulars. Last month, I mentioned that Dawn, the mission that's currently orbiting the dwarf planet Ceres, the largest asteroid, that it had started to adjust its orbit, and they had a fault on board the spacecraft. So the ion engine turned itself off, and they took several weeks to analyze the problem. I'm happy to say that as of about 4 or 5 days ago, they're back running again. And so they should be able to get the orbit down to its next targeted distance from the planet by about the middle of August. So they've lost a few weeks of good observations, but the spacecraft is back in operation. And so just to entice you, this is where we left things in June. There's this one large crater. This is about a 100-kilometer diameter crater. And this is from its previous mapping orbit at 4,400 kilometer altitude. And this crater has at least a dozen of these extremely bright spots. And this was one of the locations that caught everybody's attention when the spacecraft was still approaching Ceres. The background brightness of Ceres is about like charcoal. It reflects maybe 4 or 5% of the incoming sunlight. These spots are reflecting somewhere between 60 and 70% of the sunlight. So it's not clear yet what the bright material is, but the hope was that once they get down to the next increment in the mapping orbits, which will be about, I think it's about 1,400 kilometers. So we'll have much, much higher resolution. The spectrometers on board will finally be able to resolve these individual spots. And I expect within the next month or so, we're going to know what these things are made out of. So this was just released a day ago. This is a topography map of Ceres. So red is high, green is intermediate, blue is low. This is the location of that crater with the bright spots in it. But this is sort of a major step forward to actually figure out the sort of the topography and look for any systematic features. And the one thing you can certainly say, this is the sort of the east and west hemisphere, if you will. This hemisphere has much more high terrain than the other hemisphere. So they're certainly looking at what might have led to that. This is just a nice rotating globe animation, so you get a much better feel for the appearance of the dwarf planet. And I think the next step actually will be then to overlay the image maps onto the topography, so you get sort of a photorealistic view with the exaggerated topography. So that's our first mission to a dwarf planet. Of course, you all know that our second mission to a dwarf planet, the flyby of Pluto, happened just 2 weeks ago, and we'll get into that in just a second. Okay, so anyway, I'll just leave you with this piece of good news. They're in the process of firing the onboard ion engines for at least the next 3 weeks until the orbit spirals down to this 1,400 kilometer distance above the surface. And so they do not take images while they're actually thrusting. So we don't expect any new imaging data at any rate to be coming back until at least the middle of August. But perhaps by the next 60 minutes, we'll have some new closer views of those bright spots. Okay, the next story I wanted to spend a fair amount of time on is last week's launch of the latest crew to the International Space Station. This is called Expedition 44. So this is the 44th crew that will have spent a long-duration mission on board the space station since the first crew back in 2000. So it's been continuously inhabited since late 2000. And here's our crew. American astronaut Kjell Lindgren, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Konyenko, and Japanese astronaut Kimye Yui. And the reason I want to go into this in more detail than I usually do is Kjell Lindgren is sort of a local astronaut. He graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1996. He attended CSU in Fort Collins and got a master's degree, and then he attended medical school and got an MD in emergency medicine. And his wife is also from Colorado Springs, so lots of family, lots of friends here. In January, I was sitting in my office and got a call from him, and he said, "Gee, I'm going to be launching to the space station soon." And once I closed my jaw, I could start talking to him. But one thing led to another, and we've got a really nice collaboration going on now between him and the museum and NASA. So we hosted an event last week where about 150 of his family members came in so they could watch his launch. He has taken some artifacts from the museum to the space station. He's got a Clovis point, which is a spearhead that is widely believed to be the first evidence of humans in North America. It's about 14,000 years old. And he took up one of our patches from our volunteers in Space Odyssey, as well as one of the uniforms that they wear. So, that's sort of fun. In October or November, he'll be doing a live downlink to school kids here at the museum. So we'll have an hour where they can ask questions of him on the space station, and he'll be able to answer them. And then next spring, when he comes back after his mission, he'll be coming into the museum and spending several days doing programs and sort of letting us get all the insights of his mission. So this is sort of the beginning of a very rewarding period, I think, for us, where we'll really have an inside track on looking over the shoulders of the people on the space station. So this was a week ago Monday. This was the rollout of their Soyuz rocket in Baikonur, Kazakhstan. And unlike the typical way that we do things, they roll these rockets out horizontally on train cars. And so here's the Soyuz progressing along to the launch pad, and then they back it up to the pad and lift it vertically, and then attach it to the pad. And what historically is very interesting is this is the same launch pad that Sputnik 1 launched from in 1957, and it's also the pad that Yuri Gagarin became the first human to launch into orbit in 1961. So very historic location to leave the planet. So here's the Soyuz fully enshrouded in all the scaffolding. And then this is the morning of launch. So I wanted to follow along with some of the traditions. So there's sort of a cosmonaut hotel near the launch facility, and it's traditional that each of the crew members signs the door to their room as they're getting ready to leave. And so there's a long-running history of these signatures. What I guess I haven't heard is how often they have to replace the doors and get a new blank one. So here's the three of them heading out to their bus, which is taking them to the facility where they don their spacesuits. And I think these sorts of things are fairly amazing. So there's Lindgren inside the bus, and this is his 7-year-old son. This is the last time they'll be in close proximity, and you can only imagine what it would feel like to be a 7-year-old and realize that your parent is leaving the Earth for the next 5 months. Same thing for Oleg's children. He's on one side of a glass window there, and they get to say goodbye. And so here they are getting into their launch spacesuit. It's called the Sokol suit that they wear in the Soyuz spacecraft. And the final thing they do is a fit check of the seat. They actually have to do a custom mold of the astronaut's body for each of their seats because they're in this position basically with their knees almost pressed against their chest for about 3 hours prior to launch. And you can imagine how uncomfortable it would be if there's a sort of a spot that's rubbing in the small of your back or something and you can't move. And obviously these guys are ready to go. I think the one thing that struck me is how happy they all appeared to be. And of course, I suppose that's understandable here. They've spent 2.5 years training for this mission, and to finally get to the point of the launch is certainly a major milestone. And so here's the three of them. This is the backup crew, an American, a Russian, and a British astronaut. And the one thing that struck me throughout this is the backup crew is always along with the primary crew during the press conferences and things. These guys look really happy. The backup crew, not so much. But they get to go next. So I expect they'll be smiling in December when they launch to the station to replace these three guys. So here they are approaching the launch pad, and it's sort of, this I find a little strange that they, well, not strange, but amusing. All three of them have members of their respective space agencies sort of escorting them out to the launch pad, I guess to make sure that they don't have a change of heart and turn around and run. But the rocket is sort of right here, so that's what he's looking at. And here they are on the steps leading up to the elevator. And there's the launch. So this was last Wednesday afternoon, our time. And Eric, I think if you want to turn on the audio, I think shortly here I'll have a video of the launch. In fact, there we go.
We have engine start. 10 seconds to launch. We have liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz TMA-17M on its way to catch up with the International Space Station 5 hours, 43 minutes from now. Early reports of good first stage performance. Soyuz is delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust from the 4 boosters and the single engine. First stage of the Soyuz measures 68 feet in length, 24 feet in diameter. It's burning liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes, 6 seconds of the flight.
So this is inside the cabin. There's Lindgren waving at us. And this is Oleg Kononenko, and there's Kimye Yui.
Docking with the International Space Station later tonight. Soyuz Commander Oleg Kononenko and Kimye Yui from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency Out of view, Kjell Lindgren, U.S. astronaut. And that confirms it. The third stage is shut down. Welcome to space to Oleg Kononenko, Kimiya Yui, and Kjell Lindgren.
So that little toy that you saw floating from the ceiling, that was donated by Oleg's older child, and it's an R2-D2, and they use that just to give them a visual indication of when they're in weightlessness. And so this is the view of the Soyuz spacecraft approaching the ISS later that evening. And here's the nose of the Soyuz, so they're coming in for their docking.
About 3 meters or about 10 feet. Standing by for contact and capture.
We are waiting for contact. The range is less than 1 minute. We're standing by for contact. The crosshairs and the target are aligned.
And we have contact and capture, docking of the Soyuz TMA-17M with the International Space Station.
Station Moscow.
So there's the Soyuz. And
The hatch is open.
there's the open hatch.
Through the hatch, Soyuz commander Oleg Kononenko back aboard the space station for his third visit as a crew member of Expedition 44. Next, the U.S. astronaut Kjell Lindgren, the 217th visitor to the International Space Station, and Kimiya Yui, representing Japan's space agency, the 218th crew member to visit the International Space Station.
All right, so everybody's on board. They're getting acclimated to the ISS, and this picture was just downloaded this morning of Scott Kelly and Kjell Lindgren working on the American spacesuits in the airlock. So everyone seems to be getting settled in, and they're going to be the current. The new crew will be on the station until just a few days before Christmas this year, so a little bit over 5 months.